Good day, ladies and gentlemen, your gun doctor here. There might be some things you've heard a lot on Twitter and Twitch. He's hacking, zero recoil. How is he beaming like that? If I shoot this gun, it doesn't have that much recoil. And that is very simple because we're talking about visual recoil versus actual recoil. So how do streamers have zero recoil on certain guns? How does it feel like they have zero recoil? They're not cheating. It's a very simple thing of field of view, but it's also a frame rate. So the combination of field of view and frame rate can smoothen out certain guns tremendously to the point where they seem no recoilish, especially something like the Krig, for example. So in this video, we're looking at which gun is absolutely atrocious for controller, for console, which guns are extremely good for mouse and keyboard because the frame rate and the field of view makes it just a zero recoil gun. As an example, we're going to take two popular ones. We're going to be taking the Krig because we all know the Krig is very good, but some people seem to literally have zero recoil with it. So you can easily just use it, put on the standard build that everyone is using, and then we'll see how easy we can beam this zero recoil on the different frame rates and field of views. So it's going to be 80 field of view, 60 FPS, 80 field of view, 144 FPS, and then 120 field of view. So you can see the huge difference. But there are guns, for example, also that don't really work well with this kind of field of view. For example, the Em2. Some people say the Em2 has absolutely uncontrollable recoil for me. But the reality is it doesn't. There's only some scope shake introduced, or the Stoner, for example, that constitutes the Stoner. Then there's also a slow fire rate gun like the AK-47 Cold War. All of these, they don't really work that well on low field of view with low frame rate, but we'll show you why. This would now be the Kilo with the standard build on 120 field of view with the most FPS, 200 roughly. So as you can see, absolutely no recoil. You don't even feel any shake in the scope. But now let's look at 80 field of view and 60 FPS. This is now 80 FPS. This is now 80 field of view, 60 FPS. And if you're now shooting the Krig, you already notice the scope shake feels way more extreme in comparison to what we've had before and way less smooth. Now, if we're shooting it like really on range, you kind of feel like shaky, right? Going back to 120 with unlimited FPS and now shooting it on range. Way less shaky, way more smooth to control. The big difference though you're gonna see in a gun like the Em2. This is the Em2 now with a 120 field of view. We beam it away and you do notice there is recoil in it, but it's pretty much just the scope shake. You do notice the scope shake where it goes taka 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 taka. Yeah, that's the recoil. The thing is, it still shoots straight. The recoil is still straight up. As for 80 field of view, by the way, the recoil is exactly the same as it was for 120 field of view. So the recoil doesn't change with field of view, just the feeling of the recoil changes. Now if we're using the Em2 with an 80 field of view, it feels like even more shake in the scope. Like it has felt before like shake already, but I can see where people are saying, wow, this gun shakes a lot. Because like it's significant how much more it does feel. Like on the higher field of view, it feels way more chill, especially also with the higher frame rate. I mean, we limited this also to 60 FPS. Now let's see if we would put 80 field of view also on unlimited FPS. I mean, that's sadly not the reality that people have. And on 80 field of view, 200 FPS. And the gun again feels a bit smoother than on 60 FPS. Because on 60 FPS with less frames, the movement of the gun is more yanky. And that's like the thing with the visual recoil. The visual recoil is not just bound to the actual field of view, because field of view does hurt it. It's especially when you're talking about these slow shooting guns that have a lot of recoil. I mean, if I have 200 frames to display the visual recoil, or if I have 60 frames to display the visual recoil, in one case, the visual recoil will seem smooth. In the other case, the visual recoil will seem yanky. So if you're complaining about field of view is not really your enemy. You've seen it. The field of view does make a difference, and it's feelable, and you do notice it. And especially also, yes, in buildings and so on, when you're fighting here, it can be a problem. But the reality is that the main problem is not the field of view. The main problem is the frame rate, making things feel less smooth, more Yankee, and especially for guns that have visual scope shake. Not every gun has this extreme visual scope shake, and that's also why you can't really use a 4x scope, I feel like, on 80 field of view low FPS. I mean, let's look at the Stoner. The standard long-range Stoner build I'm running has the Royal Cross 4x. The Royal Cross 4x on the low field of view is absolutely atrocious. And we're now looking at the Stoner with the 4x. That's 60 FPS again on 80 field of view. And we'd be shooting it. And it just feels like it still does the taka, but in my eyes, it feels fairly significant how it bounces. My people are going to be like, I can't control that. But if I now do this on a high FPS and a high field of view, the gun just genuinely feels like it has no recoil, and it's so easy to control. And even the taka motion of the scopes just makes a huge difference there. So realistically, the main thing that's holding you back is your frames. So if you were able to play with a lower field of view, but with a tiny bit more frames, in general, in my eyes, it does feel better. Because in total, the 80 field of view, the 90 or the 100 field of view is still good options. You don't have to reach the 120 field of view. This is 120. I play in 115, for example, because just width fits perfect for me. But you don't need the 120. If you are in 100 field of view with the Em2, for example, but you do have a good frame rate because you're playing in a lower field of view, often boosts your frame rate. And you can still beam the gun absolutely no recoil. Yes, there's scope shake. Yes, there was scope shake before. The Stoner is very easy to beam on any distance, on any field of view. Just get the frames up and you'll be good. Get the most frames out of your computer and you're going to be great. Yes, a field of view slider would be great. I mean, I played a game of field of view, of low field of view on PC with high frames though. And it wasn't as limiting as I thought it would be. Still though, yes, a field of view slider would be great. But the main thing that's holding you back, you want to have the constant frame rates. So if your console, PS5, Xbox, allows you to get 120 FPS, 112 FPS is nice, sweet spot where everything feels way more smooth and congruent, and then you then can beam your guns better, especially the guns that have a high visual recoil. And again, as always, the reason why you can't control your recoil is not the field of view, it's not 80 field of view, it's not 120 field of view, it's not whatever, it's not your frame rates. It's mostly because your controller or your mouse and keyboard sensitivity are shit. Because if they're not on point, you can't control. I mean, the number one test is if you have a Stoner and you can't control the Stoner's recoil on a 3x scope, for example. I mean, if you're going for a 30-meter shot with a Stoner or even a 50-meter shot with a Stoner and you can't keep it on point, then your sensitivities are not there. We have 40 meters here right now. If you're not able to keep the Stoner on point, we need to talk about your sensitivity options. We don't need to talk about your field of view. We don't need to talk about your frames. We need to talk about your sensitivity. And that's what the real problem is for, I would even say 80% of the players that think they can't aim. They just don't have the right sense. I mean, we have a whole video on how to find your right sense, but it's just a very simple thing of don't be too sensitive, don't be not too sensitive, and especially have the right mouse grip or controller grip too. I mean, for the mouse, you can choose between claw, fingertip, and palm, and you can even have a hybrid of these two. Educate yourself, but that is where it really makes or breaks. Ladies and gentlemen, what is your opinion on this topic? How are you feeling about it? What gun do you feel fits good on controller and more on mouse and keyboard? I have to say that, again, the guns that shoot more fluent, they fit good on controller because first and foremost, more fluent recoil is easier to control with a controller than the Yankee recoil of taka. Because if you have a constant pressure putting your gun up, that's easier to control than bang, bang pressure. The AK-47 does, for example, bang, 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 bang. Yeah, try to apply constant pressure to counter that. Not that easy. But if you have something like the Krig or the Fire that does, you just gotta, get that 1 inch down and then you're good to go and you can beam it way easier. So all the guns that have a good fire rate, they're better on controller. On mouse and keyboard, you can choose from the creme de la creme as long as your mouse sensitivity is good, and play any kind of gun. But again, frames break it. So guns with extreme high scope shake, I would not play on low frame rates. If you don't get over 60, 70, 80 FPS, don't play the guns with a high scope shake because you will notice it and it is going to be weird for you. Then play the guns that have a less visual recoil / scope shake. And don't fret too much about field of view. If you're shit, you're shit. If you're good, you're good. And if you suck, you suck. I wish you a fantastic good day. Let's get cracking. Adapt your sensitivities. Don't forget to subscribe and see you in the next video.